in mid-January. And actually, I can't think of a better way to really kind of cap off the season than with this event, the Sirens, Rapturous song, shamanism, and the healing of addiction. This is actually part of an ongoing series, together with the Emerald Tablet, exploring culture, politics, and the study of consciousness. In January, we're going to be bringing out Dennis McKenna, the brother of Terrence McKenna, for a talk here. And then in late spring, Davi Kopanawa, who is a Yanomami shaman from the Brazilian Amazon, is also going to be here in discussion, and just it's going to be a really great event. So keep an eye on our calendar, and also the Emerald Tablet calendar. There's going to be some great collaborations coming up in the next year. So we're very, very delighted, very pleased to be working once again with both Susanna Bustos and Robert Tindall. We've hosted them again in the past numerous times. We really value the work that they're doing. I feel it's very, very important. They've been studying the practice of vegetalismo, which is plant diet and its relation to shamanism and the healing of addiction. Both have recently spent extensive time in Peru, and tonight's presentation explores two perspectives on the healing of addiction, the exploration of addiction versus shamanic initiation in the light of ancient Western texts, and a report on research into the shamanic treatments of addiction just conducted at Takiwasi, Peru, focusing especially on the lesser-known vegetalista practice of the plant diet. So, Susanna is a clinical psychologist and also has worked in music therapy. She has a doctorate in East-West psychology, and she's taught courses in entheogenic shamanism and research design at CIIS. She is a certified holotropic breathwork practitioner and is also in expressive arts. She shares a passion with Robert for indigenous cultures and their relationship to the natural world, along with an interest in the therapeutic potentials of non-ordinary states of consciousness. Her work has taken her to the Peruvian Amazon, where since 1999, she's been studying vegetalismo and other indigenous shamanic practices. One of her main interests is the integration of entheogenic experiences into ordinary life. She served as a clinical supervisor and researcher at Takiwasi, and this is a center in Peru for the treatment of drug addiction, and it integrates indigenous and Western medicine. So it's really been an inspiration to her work. She also has a private practice in the East Bay, where she incorporates many of the ideas that she explores in her research. Robert Tindall is a writer, a classical guitarist, and a longtime practitioner of Zen Buddhism. He's traveled widely and explored the intersection of cultural frontiers and their relation to states of consciousness. He's the author of 2 books, which are featuring tonight in the lobby, and there's also another table next to it. There's some very, very special artifacts with which both Susanna and Robert will talk about in a few moments. But Robert's 2 books are The Jaguar That Roams the Mind, and then most recently, The Shamanic Odyssey, Homer, Tolkien, and the Visionary Experience. I mean, doesn't that sound great? So together with Susanna, he's explored the indigenous, prophetic, and healing traditions of the Americas. And Robert is a professor of literature and divides his time between San Francisco Bay Area and Peru. Very, very honored to have him back again, and great to be featuring him for this really very, very special event. I'm glad you could all make it, and please give them a very warm welcome.
Good evening. So, just a note about the Shipibo Artesanía, which is available in the lobby. We have a relationship which is long-standing with a family down there that lives outside of Pucallpa, who do some pretty extraordinary art. And their aesthetic conception of the world is based in their experiences with plants and plant medicines going back for many, many years. So when you go in and you look at that table, you're going to be seeing synesthetic designs, which in their mythology are actually the scales of the serpent Ronin, which is what has woven the fabric of this world. And so those patterns back there, the art is inspired by an originally shamanic practice with ayahuasca and other plants in the rainforest. So go check it out and see what you experience when you look at it. There may be a cloth that speaks to you. So that said, Susanna and I have been traveling together and being partners for about a decade now. We have a 4-year-old daughter that we love dearly. And we just recently returned a couple months ago from the Peruvian Amazon, where we spent a year and a half with Susanna working at Takiwasi. And she's going to be talking about the studies that she did there, the intensive research that she did with the plant dieta. And what I'm going to talk about is going to be a bit more general. My interest got sparked into the indigenous roots of Western culture, especially the records that we have in the ancient literature, in the ancient world. And so what I wish to offer tonight are some musings on initiation and what I personally see as its shadow, addiction, within the narrative features of the Odyssey and other ancient texts. Now, in treating certain features of Homer's epic, such as the Siren song as metaphoric for addiction, I'm not attempting to reduce their otherworldly essence to a physiological or psychological condition. It's quite the opposite. I'm attempting to understand better the phenomenon of addiction from a spiritual perspective. In particular, I want to explore the nature of enchanting and addicting song in the ancient world and its ethnographic parallels with still existing shamanic cultures, such as those found in the Amazon. As we'll see in both cases, listeners to song are transfixed within the song's orbit. But enchanting song, and this is a quote from a famous Indo-European scholar, counters the decay to which mortal things are subject, with a hearing seen as close to the very essence of life, akin to the vital fluids that sustain human life in the natural world. On the other hand, addictive, siren song entraps the living within the putrefaction of their hopelessly mortal remains. Two different kinds of song. Right? Unfortunately, the latter type of enchantment, obviously analogous to the modern experience of addiction, has come to dominate our culture's experience of the voice of potent mind-altering plants and substances. Yet, long before addiction became institutionalized in the Western world, there were shamans healing and seeking knowledge through visionary plants such as ayahuasca and peyote. It's a fascinating, deeply hopeful fact that treatment of addiction, such as Takiwasi, the centers for the treatment of addiction, located in the Peruvian Amazon, through honoring the addict's original impulse towards self-transcendence, are able to set his relationship right with the spirits of the plants themselves. Okay? So, this image up here is the first one that I want to show you this evening. When Susanna and I first worked at Takiwasi, which was founded by the physician Jacques Navi and Rosa Giove in the high jungle plateau of the San Martin province of Peru. We were pretty deeply engaged in the addict's struggle to unravel the fate that had consumed their lives. And I often stood in contemplation of that work of art hanging in the office of the director of the center. In the oil painting, a young Native American, you can see him wearing head feathers, stares, head lowered at his extended upturned arm. A rubber tube is tightly bound around his forearm, and in his hand is a syringe hovering over a swollen vein. As he prepares to shoot up, he's unaware that a Buddhist deity and a Christian saint, their faces filled with compassion, are hovering over him, and that the Great Spirit is also protecting him. The juxtaposition of images, the indigenous warrior, the modern technology of addiction, the religious iconography, disturbed me. Was it honoring the path of addiction as spiritual? Was it offering hope in the bleakest, darkest night of the soul? Or was it enigmatically doing both? Over half a century ago, C.G. Jung pointed out that the deeper craving of the addict's soul is not for the substance itself. It's a profound thirst for wholeness, the natural drive of the psyche to heal from an illusory separation from the web of life. This is the very drive, we could say, that underlies shamanic practices. Now, if you take a look at Homer's Odyssey, you begin to realize that you're dealing with an indigenous document. It is filled with highly intoxicating, not because of the intoxication, we'll get to why it's an indigenous document soon, but it is filled with highly intoxicating, addictive, and benumbing substances, which sorely tempted Odysseus and his crew to abandon their homeward journey. So it's worth considering the character traits that Odysseus shares with mature shamans. Those who also, have a capacity to enter into highly perilous regions of the psyche without being seduced and entrapped in it. Unlike for the addict, a substance, such as heroin or alcohol, and his life outside the drug's feigned experience of intimacy, a hell of dwindling air and light, the practitioner of traditional medicine enters into greater spaciousness and beauty. So the addicts undergoing treatment at Takiwasi had embarked on a shamanic path of self-healing. They had chosen, with whatever actual degree of understanding, to confront themselves in the profoundest way. Like Odysseus bearing the curse of Poseidon, they had chosen to journey into the soul's abyss in order to unravel the fate that held them captive. One of the patients that we became friends with said at the conclusion of his treatment at Takiwasi, "When I was young, I read about dragons and knights and quests. Then, when I got older, I put those books aside and read science, read serious works. Then," he said, "my treatment at Takiwasi, I've gone back to my childhood love, but this time I've gone on a quest and encountered the dragons myself." So, in this is a modern rendition of ancient Greek art. They shared something with the ancient Greeks, for whom a fundamental act of heroism in an otherwise kaleidoscopically shifting world of spirits and powers was to seize one's thread of fate. The actual spinning of one's destiny by the three fates, or more, is evocative of the twisting strands of proteins and DNA. You can see this modern artist also thinks that so. As the actual spinning of one's destiny, as Clotho, the spinner, spun the thread of life, Lachesis, the apportioner of lots, measured it, assigning genetic dispositions. And finally, Atropos, who we see at the end here, who bestowed her name on the atropine alkaloids of the Solanaceae family. She who cannot be turned determined the moment of death by cutting the thread. Okay, while the thread encoded the fundamental information of a person's incarnation, there was wiggle room. Choice in how to live out one's fate still remained open. And divinity could also intervene in an individual's fate to some degree. In this way, freedom and fate inextricably intermingled. While the Morai themselves appear as terrible, often as white-robed old women, stern and unmovable as Victorian spinster aunts, There are accounts of gods wheedling concessions out of them by getting them drunk. So what this reflects is that for the ancients, the nature of existence was, while interpretable, fundamentally unknowable at its source. In Germanic and Nordic warrior culture, a similar perspective led to a marvelous heroic existentialism. Yet we see the heroes and heroines of the Odyssey adopting a more heuristic approach to the endless dimensions of existence. True, as with Chinese boxes, one could never arrive at a final box, where an ultimate reality awaits discovery within. Yet the answers for the present exigencies did lie within one of those layers of reality, and could occasionally be uncovered with boldness and determined inquiry. What the character of Odysseus and other figures in the literature of ancient Greek culture demonstrate is an adaptive stance towards divinity, not faith in God. They revered but didn't trust Zeus, but faith in the fundamental logos of the universe. Now, it might be surprising to find out that such a perspective on existence shares much with indigenous worldviews. This sort of vertiginous openness to inquiry among Amazonian shamans was first revealed to me by Juan Flores in a conversation we had while preparing plant medicines we had just gathered in the jungle. Flores, seated on a tree stump with an axe resting on his knees, suddenly posed a question to us in classic Socratic fashion. You both are very educated people. Tell me, is there something that God doesn't know? Now, coming from a vegetalista who incorporated many Catholic elements into his ceremonies, this was a disconcerting question. While we both cast about for possible answers, Juan pressed us further. God is the creator of everything, right? So if he's the creator, shouldn't he know everything? So, as Suzanne explained how Vedanta philosophy would respond to such a question, I studied Flores' expression, trying to discover if he was laying some trap for us. But he looked genuinely interested in our responses. Finally asked us, if we cannot know what lies outside of ourselves, how can God know what lies outside himself? And then he got up and walked away, leaving us to contemplate the Chinese box structure of the universe. Now, considering that Flores saw Ayahuasca as the university of the jungle, within which one could travel to distant times and study the art, say, of the ancient Egyptians, or could commune with ancient and powerful spirits, it's probably no surprise that he, like the ancient Greeks, was willing to embrace a radically inquiring stance towards existence without denying the sacredness of the cosmos. As has been recognized since most ancient times, in poison there's psyche. A plant doctor transforms or is transformed by the poison he takes into his body as medicine, but doesn't fall under its spell. Such power can be wielded for good or evil. Whatever the outcome, the doctor must drink the poison his fellow men rightly fear to imbibe. And the outcome is a character his fellow men are right to distrust, but are foolish to persecute. In my time among practitioners of shamanic indigenous medicine, I've come to observe three traits that characterize both Odysseus and those medicine women and men who live balanced, innovative lives into a highly functional old age. An adaptive, disciplined strength of mind, accompanied by an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, tempered by a profound attitude of veneration. A fine illustration of this sort of strength of mind is shown in a little scene between the newly reunited Odysseus and his son Telemachus. As they entered the darkened hall of the palace on Ithaca, Pallas Athena goes striding before them, lifting a golden lamp that casts a dazzling brilliance. Father, Telemachus suddenly bursts out, "Oh, what a marvel fills my eyes. Look there, all the sides of the hall. The handsome crossbeams, pinewood rafters, the tall columns towering, all glow in my eyes like flaming fire. Surely a god is here, one of those who rule the vaulting skies." So Odysseus, aware of the dangers of fascination with numinosity, has little tolerance for his son's visionary naivete. He roundly rebukes Telemachus for his lack of control and sends him off to bed as a punishment. "Quiet, get a grip on yourself. No more questions now. It's just the way of the gods who rule Olympus. Off you go to bed." Nor has Odysseus much empathy for stoners, involving, as the condition does, loss of memory and drive in the human realm. This explains why Odysseus, that cunning raconteur of spirits, displays such ruthlessness when his crew encounters the lotus eaters, the island people who seduce his war-weary men by giving them the narcotic lotus to taste. Just as soldiers returning from Vietnam sought a balm for their shell shock and heroin, Odysseus's men seek oblivion under the lotus's soothing effects. All memory dissolved forever. Odysseus brought them back to the hollow ships, and streaming tears. I forced them, hauled them under the rowing benches, and lashed them fast. This mind that no magic can enchant, as Circe says, is akin to the discerning eye towards spirits wielded by the Desert Fathers, those early Christian ascetics who fled the urban centers to seek God in the wilderness. In one account of the Verba Signorum, this is about Abba Macarius. Once Abba Macarius was traveling down from Crete to a place called Teranuthin, and he went to spend the night in a pyramid where the bodies of the pagans had been laid to rest years before. And he dragged out one of the mummies and put it under his head for a pillow. The devils, seeing his boldness, flew into a rage and decided to scare him. And they began to call out from the other bodies, as if calling to a woman, "Lady, come with us to the baths." And another demon, as if he were the ghost of a woman, cried out from the body the elder was using as a pillow, "This stranger is holding me down and I can't come." But the elder, far from being frightened, began to pummel the corpse, saying, "Get up and go swimming if you're able." Hearing this, the demons cried, "You win," and they fled in confusion. Now, considering Odysseus' contest with Circe and his voyage to Hades, it's obvious that his ruthlessness towards dabblers does not arise from paranoia about altered states of consciousness. Quite the opposite. Odysseus displays a boldness of inquiry into perilous terrains of the psyche, akin to that found among indigenous medicine people. Inherent in this practice is the accrual of power, a power for which shamanic death and reintegration are necessary, for they lead to a stronger mental state, enabling the shaman to negotiate more effectively with powerful spirits. Like Odysseus with his many disguises and transformations, numbered among the doctors of the California poets were, this is a quote, "those who dressed up in bear and panther costumes and hid out in the woods, ambushing and killing people." These ambivalent medicine men were considered doctors because of their accrued power. Because they got so good, they could mimic even minor details of the behavior of the animals they were. The bear doctor in the wild was virtually inseparable from the wild bear, and his claws left equivalent marks in his victim. Regarding this peculiar species of man-beast, Richard Grossinger comments, "We see brutality and sadism, ritualized and unnecessary. They see spiritual accomplishment." Yet, these are extreme examples that help establish the rule. Despite the shaman's explorations of terrains and powers beyond the average human can, or rather because of it, his or her character is often a notably attractive one. Reichold Domotov's description of the Payis among the Tucano people, about whom he says, above all, a Payi's soul should illuminate. It should shine with a strong inner light, rendering visible all that is in darkness, all that is hidden from ordinary knowledge and reasoning, captures the nobility, even the refined cultivation achieved by many mature shamanic practitioners. With Odysseus, we see that any survival capacity in the shamanic realm hinges on the ability to have clear, meaningful visions. It's the same for the Payis among the Tucano. A Payi must have a vision that's not blurred. His sense of hearing must be acute. He must be able to distinguish clearly the images that appear to his mind while in a state of trance, and to understand the supernatural voices speaking to him. But beyond those prerequisites, what distinguishes the Payi from others is that he's an intellectual. This is a quote of Reichold Domatov. He's immensely curious. He's always interested in animals and plants, the weather, the stars, diseases, anything that to others is unpredictable. He's a humanist in the sense that he's interested in the pagan antiquities of his own cultural tradition, in myths of origin, in archaeological sites, in long-forgotten place names, and in stories of legendary migrations. When a few friends gather, he'll talk and sing all night long. He will recall past events, speak of some special cases in his practice, and will be a great raconteur. Sounds like Odysseus, doesn't it? Much like Odysseus, who upon encountering Dante in the Inferno, informs the medieval statement that men are not made to live like brutes, but to follow virtue and knowledge. The driving force for a Payi is a passionate interest in learning more and more about the powers he perceives in his vision. A truly intellectual interest in the unknown. And that not so much for the purpose of acquiring power over his fellow men, as for the personal satisfaction of knowing things which others are unable to grasp. Royal son of Laertes, Odysseus, master of exploits, man of pain. What now? What brings you here, forsaking the light of day? Asks Tiresias when Odysseus ferrets him out in Hades. So, such discipline of mind, capacity for discrimination in expanded states of consciousness, and pragmatic problem-solving orientation towards visionary experience clearly distinguishes the experience of initiation from addiction. It's also dangerous. Hands down, the clearest dramatization of this bodily quest that a shaman undertakes is the ordeal Odysseus chooses to undergo in hearing the Siren's rapturous song. This is an ancient Greek representation of Odysseus bound to the mast. As the Sirens were originally conceived of as winged figures, and you can see them hovering over him as he writhes in the trance state that he's gone into and caught in their song. Much like Chieri of the Solanese family, who, according to the Huichol Indians, with the enchanting music of his violins, it's a plant that the Huichol Indians are familiar with in Mexico. This plant spirit, with the enchanting music of his violin, lures the unwary, and whoever obeys his wiles suffers insanity or death. Much like that spirit, the Song of the Sirens is so enthralling, so addictive, that Circe warns Odysseus it will spellbind any man alive. In what can now be read as a vivid allegory for the degenerative effects of drug addiction, Circe continues, Whoever draws too close, off guard, and catches the siren's voices in the air, no sailing home for him. No wife rising to meet him, no happy children beaming up at their father's face. The high, thrilling songs of the sirens will transfix him, lolling there in the meadow. Around them heaps of corpses rotting away, rags of skin shriveling on their bones. Circe instructs Odysseus to stop your shipmates' ears so none can hear. Yet proceeds to say, but if you are bent on hearing, have them tie you hand and foot, erect at the mast block, lashed by ropes to the mast, so you can hear the siren song to your heart's content. Odysseus informs his shipmates of his desire, and when speeding toward the siren's island, driven on by a brisk wind, the wind fell in an instant, all glazed to a dead calm. A mysterious power hushed the heaving swells. His men leap into action. Odysseus plugs his crewmen's ears with beeswax, and his men bind him to the mast of the ship. Again, the episode displays compelling parallels with the experience of entering the first stage of the intensified trajectory with a psychoactive plant, or the rush of a smoked or injected narcotic substance. As Odysseus relates his induction into their rapturous song. They sent their ravishing voices out across the air, and the heart inside me throbbed to listen longer. I signaled the crew with frowns to set me free. They flung themselves at the oars and rowed on harder, Perimedes and Eurylochus springing up at once to bind me faster with rope upon chafing rope. Their promise: we know all the pains that the Greeks and Trojans once endured on the spreading plain of Troy when the gods willed it so. All that comes to pass on the fertile earth, we know it all. They offer anesthesia rather than release from the burden of memory in the honeyed voices pouring from our lips. Indeed, as if they have detected Odysseus' heart's desire to hear the song of his exploits at Troy sung with Cleos, a desire that ultimately leads to his catharsis at the song of the bard Demodocus. The sirens cunningly address him with his unique epithet, Polyainos, the highly praised, or widely famous one, aiming at the most vulnerable chink in his armor. Odysseus' men leave him the flail in his bonds. When the island has been lost to sight over the horizon and the wind has risen again, Odysseus' crew unplug their ears of the beeswax that has preserved them and freed Odysseus. Odysseus reveals nothing of what he's heard in these rapturous voices, yet his ordeal suggests there's something well worth hearing in this song, something sacred even. Of such power is this maritime crucifixion that, had it been accessible to medieval allegorists, it might have been seen as the pagan foreshadowing of the crucifixion of Christ. Like the Gorgon head that Odysseus fears will emerge from the nethermost regions of the underworld, transfix him, and turn his psyche into stone. The sirens embody a power dwelling deep in the psyche, which has a concealed kinship with the bards. The key difference is that bardic and heavenly song awakens recollection, whereas siren song brings about narcosis, such as in Pindar's account of the golden charmers, creatures who perched atop a mythical temple of Apollo at Delphi and sang so sweetly that the visitors perished there, apart from wives and children, their souls suspended in the honeyed voice. In both cases, however, the hearer is, like Odysseus, bound to the mast. That is, he is transfixed within the song and it will work its way on him. Now, I wanted to give you the full account of the experience of St. Brendan of being entrapped within a heavenly song, but I need to summarize it. St. Brendan, of course, was an Irish saint in the 10th century, who was also famous for, like Odysseus, being able to sail off into the spiritual topography of the ocean. So he was actually able to reach paradise. But he wasn't able to stay long because they had the space reserved. But at one point in his monastery, he was visited by a very accomplished harpist who wished for him to be able to hear his playing. But Brendan always went around with wax earplugs around his neck so he could stick them in his ear whenever necessary. And the harpist barged his way in to get an audience with Brendan. And Brendan sat there visibly tolerating the sound of his music. And we would have been entranced by this man's skill. And so when it was over with, the man asked him, "Did you not like my playing?" And Brendan said to him, "It's not that I didn't like your playing. It's just that one time I was in the church and a bird came down and landed on the altar and it said to me, I'm the angel Michael who has come to sing for you." And Brendan said, "Sing." And for a day and a night I was entranced within that song. And then Brendan reaches out with his stylus and scrapes it on the bridge of the harp. Ding! And he says to him, "Does that sound sweet to you?" He says, "After hearing that heavenly song, all earthly music sounds the same to me." In a similar vein, Pablo Amaringo, the most recognized and talented of the Amazonian visionary painters, explained to us, when you listen to the song of a spiritual being, an Icaro, what a marvel. Saying this, he pointed to one of the princely figures that inhabit the spiritual landscape of his paintings, which he had unrolled on a table in front of us. With this song, you could live for millions of years. No desire to eat. You don't want anything. You're so content. The first time I heard an Icaro, I said to my master, "I would like to live with this for the rest of my life." Without it, they wouldn't be living. The contentment, happiness, I don't know how many other things, but how beautiful. Those are the Icaros. Much as Pindar's visitors to Delphi, caught in the songs of the charmers, or in Brendan's transport in angelic music, Amaringo relates a similar total loss of appetite and state of absorption. Plato, pointing to this underlying kinship between bardic and siren song, states, "When the muses first appeared to humanity, some men were so overcome with their song that they refused to eat or drink, but just sang themselves to death." Apparently caught in the same labyrinth of visions as to sailors rotting away around the sirens. He concludes, "From these maddened men came the tribe of locusts, which in like manner emerged from the ground only to sing their seasonal song and then die." Unlike the epic bard, and we could also add the Amazonian shaman, who presences the eternal inhabitants of deep time in a performance inspired by the goddess of memory, thereby countering the decay to which all mortal things are subject. The song of the sirens is a closed circuit. Like addiction, the sirens merely entrap the living in the putrefaction of their hopelessly mortal remains. The pseudo-omniscient voice, the promise of intimacy and oblivion, the offer of existential release. We ought to recognize this darkly enrapturing song. We hear it in the flame hovering over the bowl of the crack pipe, the genie unloosed from the bottle, the needle plunging into the vein, the glow at the tip of the cigarette. Such sirens leave heaps of corpses in their wake. Gregory David Roberts, in his autobiographical novel Shantaram, gives us a fine simulacrum of the experience of skirting that honeyed voice and then leaving it, as Odysseus does in his wake. Robert's description of going cold turkey has a remarkable symmetry with Odysseus' account of his own binding to the mast. Trembling and moaning with pain, I dragged the cot closer to the great window that looked out on the sea. I took up a cotton sheet and began to tear at it with my teeth. It gave way in a few places, and I ripped it along the length, tearing off strips of cloth. Frantic in my movements and close to panic, I hurled 2 thick embroidered quilts onto the rope bed for a mattress and lay down on it. Using 2 of the strips, I tied my ankles to the bed. With a 3rd strip, I secured my left wrist. Then I lay down and turned my head to look at Nazir. I held out the remaining strip and asked him with my eyes to bind my arm to the bed. It was the first time that we'd ever met one another's eyes in an equally honest stare. He took the strip of cloth from my hand and bound my right wrist to the frame of the bed. A shout of trapped, panic fear escaped from my open mouth, and another. I bit down on my tongue, biting through the flesh at the sides until blood ran down my lips. He tore another thick strip from the sheet and twirled it into a corkscrew tube. Sliding it between my teeth, he tied a gag behind my head, and I bit down on the devil's tail, and I screamed. To enter into the orbit of such transfixing song, to imbibe the poison, to transmute it in the laboratory of one's own body, and to emerge newly reconstituted with enhanced survival abilities, that is Odysseus' challenge. This is a voluntarily undergone ordeal in Odysseus' case. Yet an unquenchable spirit of adventure, which Dante ascribes to Odysseus in his Inferno, is not enough to interpret his motives. In the image of Odysseus lashed to the mast of his ship, we see Odin hanging on the world tree to discover the runes. Both are making sacrificial offerings of themselves. In so doing, unlike the addict, in whose trance the drug becomes his feigned ally and protector, the shaman opens himself in trance to the dream of the earth and the night sky. Psychologically speaking, the benefits of these kinds of initiatory ordeals, such as any spiritual practice which cracks us back open to the cosmos, are obvious. James Hillman describes how a life unleavened by dark mystery, whether from the underworld or otherworld, leads to the kind of encroaching paralysis that engenders not only depression, but addiction. He says there's a curious correlation between feelings of reality about the underworld and feelings of value about the soul. It is as if, when we have no vivid imagination of the underworld, a flattening takes place. Even a depersonalization that must be made good by Epicurean community and friendship, of what today is called relating. The less underworld, the less depth, and the more horizontally spread out becomes one's life. The materialistic view ends in a kind of void, the very halls of Hades, now only a spiritual vacuum. For its myths and images have been called irrational simulacra, fantasies of fear and desire. The end is depression. And this suggests that the pervading, though masked, depression in our civilization is partly a response of the soul to its own lost underworld. The final characteristic of mature shamanic practitioners is reverence. A deep respect for plants, animals, waterways, mountains, and spiritual powers, whatever their nature, is a trait found highly developed among native and traditional healers. This shows in their handling of psychoactive or addictive plants such as tobacco. Amid with recognition of their divine origins, may have been key in allowing their culture to better integrate powerful consciousness-altering and narcotic plants into their lives. This is illustrated in a curiously forgotten episode of the myth of Prometheus, related in Apollonius's account of the voyage of Jason and the Argonauts. There we find the Titan Prometheus, cruelly bound to a mountaintop by Zeus in punishment for having brought fire and cultural knowledge to humanity, undergoing his passion. Each day a great eagle descends and feasts on his liver, only to have the organ regenerate at night to begin the cycle of agony all over again. Such is the Titan's love for humanity that even out of his torment comes a gift to relieve suffering, a plant. It sprang up newly formed when the flesh-tearing eagle caused bloody ichor from the suffering Prometheus to drip to the ground on the Caucasian crags. Its flower rises on twin stalks a cubit high. In color, it resembles the Corkian crocus, and the root in the earth is like newly cut flesh, like the dark juice from an oak on the mountains. The Greeks called the dark juice of this plant the drug of Prometheus, and it gave men strength, endurance, and resistance to pain, even from weapons and fire. From a mass of supporting evidence, including the fact that the place that Prometheus contended with Zeus was called Mekone, which in Greek means poppy. It's clear that Prometheus's blood, the divine ichor that runs in the veins of the immortals, gave birth to the poppy, and the poppy gave birth to pain-killing. Now, this image is actually from Crete, and it was found by archaeologists in what was a sanctuary to the goddess of opium. And here you can see her in rapture, in trance. And if you look at her crown, you can clearly see the slit opium poppy bulbs around in there. They also found a fire inside there in which they found that they had been burning opium in the fire and filling the enclosed space with the smoke. So people were journeying into her Pure Land. There is also a ring that was found at Mycenae, which shows her enthroned in her Pure Land with the symbols of the Minoan civilization with her receiving offerings. So I'm going to be skipping forward a little bit and actually drawing to my conclusion. There's even more that I would like to share, but I'm going to send you to my book for that. I hope that you will buy it and read it. Would that people acted with such reverence and gratitude for tobacco as do the native peoples who first discovered it as medicine. Would that we knew it as intimately as the ancients once knew Hermes, guided souls. Our veneration, I believe, would help heal us of our addiction. So that's what I have to offer for now. It seems that it would be a good moment to open for questions. And then we'll take a short break and Susanna will speak about the work going on in Takiwasi. Sir?
Oh yeah, could you please clarify the difference between tobacco use in our culture and the indigenous cultures? Because,
Sure.
you know, they're using it to cleanse and in their rituals, but we use it as being addicted to it. And how do they use it and not get lung cancer?
Well, one thing that I should say is that the tobacco they're using is pure. And what most people smoke up here is actually about 5% cancer-causing chemicals. I'm not even sure it's the tobacco causing the cancer. I think it may be the additives. But besides that, addicts don't have your average Marlboro smoker, a pack-a-day smoker, is using the tobacco as a crutch. It's a stress reliever. It's a way of communing with something which not only satisfies the craving of his body, which always requires more, but also gives him a kind of check-out time to go into a kind of trance where he's disconnected. The use of tobacco in the Amazon and also among the native people here in the north is, oh, and by the way, a smoker of Marlboro is actually in a relationship with some cowboy in an advertisement. There's no divinity here. There's no sacred presence. There's no intention for healing. There's no prayer involved in this. It's simply narcissistic. Tobaceros down in South America will drink tobacco in purges in order to clean out their body, or they'll give that to people. A purge is a very common feature in the vegetalista tradition. You can also diet tobacco, where you go into the forest and you drink a prepared potion of tobacco, and you begin to have dreams of the tobacco spirit that comes to you and teaches you and helps heal you. Tobacco smoke is actually a way to just like purify yourself, clean yourself, and it's a protector. And it's also considered by many to be a director of spirits and of plants. So when you see a shaman preparing a brew that's going to be used as medicine, they will most often blow tobacco upon it and sing over it as a way to catalyze its vitality.
It's not inhaled.
And most crucially, it's not inhaled. So what the primary thing that I see is we abuse the plant from the beginning. And we have been abusing it since the time of the Virginia colonies. The addiction actually, I believe that there is a connection between our lack of respect for plants and our lack of just fundamental curiosity of wanting to know, what is this plant? What's it got to teach me? What's its spirit? How does it, what world is it opening up? We don't want to know. Instead, we treat it as a commodity. And I think that that's the great danger, is when you take the potent things of this world and don't approach them with respect and proper understanding, you end up with this very disastrous situation that we have that's arisen from our abuse of tobacco. Same thing with opium, which is a sacred plant. Same thing with the coca leaf. Yeah.
Can I just say that you provoked my mind to think that not just tobacco or any addiction, obesity and food, because it all goes back to what you said in regards to respect for what the earth produces for us. And we don't really take a moment to appreciate what it's done for us to survive as a species or whatever.
Yeah.
Because that's what I got.
And it's absolutely true, and even a little bit beyond that, our kinship with them.
I've been looking for metaphors, like visual metaphors, to show what consciousness looks like when it goes through the initiation. And you were describing something. I want to see what you think about this, because when you said without the imagination, spirit without the imagination, a flattening without depth occurs, a flattening of consciousness without depth, or
The horizontalization.
And I want to suggest something, because I found a metaphor that might work we'll definitely see what you think about it. It was contracting, constricting, and expanding multidimensionally, because I found that the metaphors of depth and height and breadth are all kind of relative to what they mean a particular thing. But I found constricting and expanding to really work in a way, because, for instance, when you expand horizontally, this plane, you're connecting to community in a sense, or when you go up to spirit, to the shadow, to depth. So there's a lot of I'm just trying to get a more appropriate kind of visuals. It's hard to put it into a three-dimensional visual model, but see what you think about that, because I saw you attempting to do that too. It needs to be done.
I wish I had the quote of Tolkien's I recently discovered. He's my other great fave. He's Tolkien, And he's got this wonderful thing. He says that life becomes simply trite when you look at everything as your possession. It's just trite. And that he actually says that there's a clear vision that can come where we recognize the breadth and depth and dimensions in things. And early on, he stated that there are some fundamental desires that human beings have, and one of them is communion with other beings. And if you look at the Lord of the Rings, everybody's communing in there. Plants are speaking, birds are, everything's sentient. It's an animistic vision of the cosmos that Tolkien was reintroducing to us. And for myself, I've come to understand breadth and depth as an animate cosmos. It's the wonder of it. It's open and it's not my possession. It's dangerous. It's potent. It has unexpected beauty. And that's where that vitality that James Hillman was talking about comes from the underworld. Ayahuasca is the vine of the dead, of the ancestors, of spirits. That's how I understand it. That's how I come to understand it. Thanks for your question. There's one other question? Okay, why don't we take a break and Susanna will get ready. 5-minute break. Okay.